Hello, everyone. We're getting settled, but thank you so much, everyone, for coming here today. This is so exciting to see a real audience in person. We're just thrilled to have you here. My name is Joy Yamaguchi. I'm the Public Programs Coordinator here at JANM. And with that, I think that's it. And thank you so much to all of our live stream audience here as well. We're really excited. We have folks here in person, we have folks online, and we have folks in our overflow spaces here as well. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to the President and CEO of JANM, Ann Burrows.
Welcome, everyone. Gosh, just to add my voice of excitement to Joy's, this is our first live event that we've had since March 2020. So you're it. So a huge big welcome to you. It means so much to us, and of course to everybody who is watching us online. And I know it's going to be a fantastic program. And for those of the gearheads out there who are watching us, you won't have had the opportunity to see the 4 incredible cars that are on the plaza, but you will certainly hear about them, and I'm sure see images of them as the program goes on. So I'm not going to give the game away at this point. But so it's really welcome to all of you. I hope that when this program's over, you'll have the opportunity to visit our galleries. I'm sure many of you are familiar with JANM. We've just opened a new exhibition called Life in Pieces, the diary and letters of Stanley Hayami. So I hope that you'll take the time to come and see it. It's worthwhile, it's beautiful, it's moving, and it incorporates virtual reality, animation, colorized film from Heart Mountain, from the incarceration. So it's pretty extraordinary. Please take time to come and look at it. You know, I want to say a special thanks. Of course, I'm looking straight into the light, so I can't see him. But a special thanks to Phil Chung and Yum Yum F, our partners. Phil, I think you're up there, so just wave your hand. You know, Phil has been so integral to this whole idea, seeded this idea for us, and he's been so integral into making this happen. I'd also like to thank our panelists and car owners, Janet Fujimoto, Tod Kaneko, Brian Karasawa, Ken Miyoshi, and Samuel Ramirez. And then, of course, a very special thank you to Oliver Wang, who he's really the sort of heart of this program that you'll hear today. And in fact, he's going to be our curator on an exhibition that we're hoping to bring we're working on it now. We're working on the research and that. So, you know, today really is just a preview. Today is our opening salvo on what we hope will eventually be a blockbuster exhibition of these cars and the story of the clubs and that particular culture. But, you know, I'm going to bring Oliver up now. He probably, to many of you, needs very little introduction. But for those of you who don't know him, Oliver is a professor of sociology at CSU Long Beach, where he's researched and written on topics related to popular music, food, sports, and now car culture. Both his father-in-law and uncle-in-law were part of Nikkei car clubs in the 1950s and the 1960s in the San Fernando Valley and Boyle Heights, respectively. So I'm going to have Oliver come up, enjoy the program, and thank you to all of our panelists.
Protocol. This is incredible. I mean, we were originally actually supposed to do this panel a year ago, and for obvious reasons that wasn't able to happen, and partly because we wanted to do it in person. We wanted to be able to bring cars out on the plaza. I'll talk more about those cars in a moment, but this was really something that has been in the discussion for quite a while. I'm so thankful for all of you who are here in person in the forum, and of course everyone who's watching streaming online. First off, I want to thank the organizations who were fundamental in making today happen. And this project was made possible with support from the California Humanities, a nonprofit partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities, visit calhoun.org for more information. It was also, as Ann mentioned, made possible by Yam Yam F, whose Philip Chung was absolutely integral in both, as Ann mentioned, seeding the idea for this overall project, and very much helping to produce today alongside the museum's Joy Yamaguchi and the rest of the staff at the museum who have handled all of the logistics for getting the cars on the plaza, doing the streaming, recording things, etc. And last but not least, thank you to the Nisei Week Festival, who are holding, this year's festival is virtual, but hopefully everyone will be back in person in the streets of Little Tokyo next summer, so long as there's not like, COVID 2022. All right. On a personal note, I wanted to thank my research assistant who's out there, Ernest Ortiz, who has been of immeasurable help to me during this process. And I also want to shout out my family, because originally I became interested in this topic of the history of Japanese American car culture because my wife, Sharon Mazzotta, suggested that I interview her father, Don, who, as Ann mentioned, him and his fellow Sansei friends who grew up at San Fernando Valley High School started the Kame Car Club back in the late 50s. And for those unfamiliar, Kame means turtle because they did not have fast cars. So they were ironic before it became cool to be ironic, I guess. Likewise, my daughter, Ella Mazzotta Wang, came up with the title of today's panel. I think she thought it was a joke. It was clever to say Little Tokyo Drift, but it kind of stuck. We said, hey, actually, that's a really good title for this. So thanks to her for that. And shout out to my sister, Jessica, who's in town visiting from Seattle. One note, if you have any questions for any of the panelists, for those on the live stream, you can send those questions either through the Zoom Q&A feature, or you can text them to 213-632-6531. All right, so we are here today to revisit the history of the Nisei Week cruise, which I'm assuming probably most people in this audience have some familiarity with. But for those people who are not, the cruise was considered to be one of the most important events for the Japanese American car community here in LA, beginning as early as the 1960s and through the 70s and late 80s, eventually bringing out upwards of thousands of young people to line the streets around the Nisei Week Carnival to watch an endless stream of cars, trucks, motorcycles circle the grounds. And just to give you a glimpse of what it was like at the peak, this is a 2-minute segment from a much longer video shot by Gardina's Scott Aoyagi that he shot back at the Nisei Week cruise in 1987.
From Nisei Week Carnival. It just ended about 5 minutes ago. And I don't know what these fire trucks are doing over here, but it gives a lot of trouble.
Yo, Mobies.
Say hi to Glenn.
Hey, Glenn. Hey, Glenn. I was gonna do it. Hey, Mark, what's that? I just heard it, Jack. Getting started. You'll burn out!
And there goes Kim's friend again. Yeah! I like that.
Georgie was cracking up. Hey!
I just want to make clear that the museum does not condone doing burnouts at stoplights. Just incredible footage. And I think had the cruise lasted into the 90s, we probably would have had much more footage of it because of the explosion in camcorders. But Scott was very much ahead of his time to be able to capture this footage in the 80s that he did. And you can really tell it's the 80s because of all the members-only jackets and the hairstyles. So to talk about the cruise, we pulled together our STEAM panel, who I'll now introduce. We'll start with Janet Fujimoto, is a 30-year dedicated Toyota employee and has continued her career in the automotive industry after Toyota's move to Texas. She is a lifelong car enthusiast, and for today, out on the plaza, she brought her award-winning 1970 Toyota Crown. Similarly, Tod Kaneko, who is at the far end there, his passion for car culture led him to a lifelong career in the automotive industry, including working on professional race teams, engineering turbochargers, and doing research and development for Mazda. It all started for him as a young Sansei kid, inspired by the automotive scene while growing up in Torrance. Todd brought his just spectacularly beautiful Datsun 1972 240Z out there, which I might try to take from him. All right. Right here, we have Brian Karasawa, who was a regular participant of Nikkei car cruises in the 70s and 80s as a member of the Long Beach Car Club Shoreline Racing. Brian currently owns a number of old Toyotas, including the equally gorgeous 1977 Toyota Celica GT liftback that is parked outside. Brian is also actively involved with two of the largest old school import car shows that are in the area, the All Toyota Fest and the Japanese Classic Car Show, which I think is coming up in, is it October? October in Long Beach. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Ken Miyoshi, former club DJ and promoter turned pioneering import car show organizer. Ken has been at the forefront of promoting various youth trends, including the auto sport of drifting, Japanese anime, and the new deco car movement, as represented by the 2013 Mitsubishi Lancer Evo X that's parked on the plaza that was driven here by Ken's friend, Samuel Ramirez. Sam, where are you at? He drove from Reno to bring a car. So shout out to Samuel for doing that. That's amazing. Ken, and very importantly, has also helped to organize the annual Nisei Week car show for the past 20 years. And so he's fundamental to this, the kind of the modern history of cars at Nisei Week as well. Okay. And for those of you who are at home, we're going to show you all a brief sneak peek at the cars that we just mentioned in this video clip. So back to the panel. I want to start with people's earliest memories of the Nisei Week cruise, and I'm not going to try to age either Janet or Todd, but I think both of you started coming here as early for the cruise as early as the mid 1970s, and would love to know what how did you end up participating in it or just witnessing it, and what was it like at that time? And Janet, let's start with you. Oh, is it already turned on? Yeah.
Probably the oldest person in the room. I'll just admit it now. So, and my first memory of cruising is in 1975. Literally, I remember going to my first cruise at Crenshaw Square, which is no longer there. And of course, about a month later is the Nisei Week cruise that would take place every August. So actually, that video was pretty representative of what it used to look like. And now as a parent, it's pretty horrifying to watch. So, but it was just a really fun time as a teenager, and you could feel the excitement and the adrenaline and you'd see the best and the baddest cars out there. And afterwards, I don't know if I want to admit this or not, but there would be the street races that would take place afterwards, which are not anything like the bad rap that you hear about today. It was much more respectful, I want to say. But yeah, it was a really important time just because it just felt like a really huge gathering that took place every year. And it was just the camaraderie amongst that whole culture and the whole group.
Todd.
So Janet, I think I've got you by a couple of years. So actually I started off probably mid-70s as well, but I was a passenger back then. So I had my first experience when my friends had a Capri. So we used to work on cars every night during the summer. I guess everybody kind of shot for Nisei Week as the kind of premier car to, or at least to show it up, debut your vehicle at. So he gave me a ride, and it kind of sold me. I mean, that the crowd, the people watching, he actually did a little race on the street and won. So, I mean, it was, for a young kid, it was very exciting and kind of sold me. And again, just the passion and the interest and everything grew since then.
Brian, let's hear from you, because I think we're part of the 80s generation, right?
I guess so.
You're good.
Okay. I guess, yeah, I'm a little bit younger, not much younger than some of the folks here. But yeah, my experiences are very similar to Todd's, I think, where, my first experience in Carnival that I attended to was Crenshaw. And at that time, I actually wasn't a driver. I was actually riding with one of my friends. But yeah, it was like from that moment, it was just hooked. And it's like, oh, someday I'm going to get one of these cars. With that, too, I think there was, for me, growing up, there were friends who were a little bit older than me and my cousins who lived locally, just in the neighborhood. But they would always drive back and forth between their houses. And at that time, I'd be riding my skateboard on the sidewalk. And I would see those cars go by, right? As Todd said, the Capri, right? The Mazdas. Even some of the muscle cars, Chevy Chevelles and things. And it was the same thing. It was like, oh, someday I'm going to get one of those cars and drive one and own one. So I think for me, it was just having those early experiences as a ride along and seeing others that were older than me just play with their cars and do stuff. It was just, that's how I was hooked.
I forgot to mention that Brian is really fundamental to this panel existing, because I had written an article about the car clubs of the 50s and 60s within the JA community here in LA, and he had seen, this was on Janum's discovernikkei.org website, and Brian got in contact with me because he saw that I was a professor at Long Beach and say, I know this is sort of in a different era from what you were writing about, but I grew up in Long Beach. I was part of this crew called Shoreline Racing, and just thought you might be interested in sort of our history. So I went out and interviewed him. He lives in Cyprus. And it just opened up a completely new chapter and introduced me to a lot of folks. And specifically, he introduced me to the Nisei Week cruise, which I hadn't heard of previous to that. So I just want to give credit where it's due, because Brian has been really at the hub of a lot of different movements and generations, and I owe him a lot in terms of the knowledge that he shared with me. So thank you for that. All right, last but certainly not least, we have Ken, who I guess you're the young gun on this panel. You started coming to the cruise in the mid-late 80s, right?
Yeah, so basically, it was somewhere in the late 80s. That's when actually, the Honda invasion started coming in. So most of my recollections would be like an A86, the 80 Supras, and pretty much in the 80s. And there was two events to actually look forward to, which was the Nisei Week cruise and OCBC cruise. So those are the two events that happened. And my recollection would be, my brother actually is 2 years older than me, got the license before me, and driving a S12 200SX with nitrous. And once when I got to Nisei Week, I was just blown away with all the cars and all the people that was at the gallery, where basically out on the street just checking them out. So that's my first start. Okay.
And so cruising happened at other JA events and festivals throughout the Southland. And, like I mentioned, my father-in-law, who came of age in the 50s, him and his friends would cruise, the Obones and other festivals. And I was actually talking a little bit with Janet's husband, Dwayne, who's out there, and he mentioned that the Nisei Week cruise, from his recollection, began at least as early as some point in the 1960s. It's kind of hard to pinpoint these dates. But I'm wondering, I mean, cruising was not something that was unique to just Nisei Week, but at some point, Nisei Week became the king of the cruises. And this is a question for anyone on the panel. Why Nisei Week of all of the different festivals that are out there? Why did this become the biggest event for the car community here in LA? And anyone who wants to take this.
I don't know if any of us know that answer. I can't think of one. The one thing I do remember, though, is at the time that when I was a teenager and I started going to these, it was really muscle car era still. So you'd see a completely different set of cars than what transpired to a decade later, which really became the Japanese import. And so it was kind of an interesting transition that I saw from that phase to like what you see out on the plaza today. And but I don't know, that's a really good question. I'm not sure how that happened exactly. I think it probably also might have been because, there was that big parking lot where, I don't even know the surrounding streets off of, is it First Street? But there would be a giant carnival there every year. And so probably all the families went out and maybe you went there with your friends at nighttime and maybe that's where it kind of started. So afterwards, maybe that's how that started. But it was definitely one of the bigger ones. It was the king for sure.
I think I could add to that. From a promoter standpoint, I think it's geographically located in the center where everybody from San Fernando, OC, even San Diego would come up and it would attract the most crowd. And I think the geographical location was the biggest key versus like the OCBC or other locations.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's central, right? And I think it also it's probably the biggest, like Janet was saying, it was the biggest parking lot for the carnival and had the most surrounding streets where you can cruise. So I would agree. I think, compared to a lot of the Obon festivals and whatnot, Nisei was central and it was big, it had a big area to drive in.
And also there was Stadium Way, that was just pretty local. I think we could talk about that later.
That's afterwards.
Todd, can you repeat that again?
Yeah, there's a venue. So basically after the carnival ended, everybody would progress up to the Stadium Way, which is near Dodger Stadium.
Which was a big street racing spot.
For other activities.
Right. So again, we can revisit that later. But which goes back to Ken's point about the importance of geography and the fact that it's downtown makes it very central from people coming from different parts of the greater Southern California area. It's notable that each of you, I think, from your original introduction to the cruise, it was sort of, you weren't behind the wheel. You were too young. But at some point, right, all of you, I'm assuming, participated in the cruise behind the wheel. So can you tell me what was it like knowing that the Nisei Week was coming up, knowing the cruise was getting up, how would you prepare for it? Because from the people I've talked to, this was like the premier event. So you're going to spend a lot of time getting ready for it. Walk us through that experience a little bit. And Brian, you want to start?
Sure. I think it starts years before by just trying to save money so you can buy your parts. But, I think it's just kind of like a lot of things. It needs time to build your car. You need, time to prep. You buy parts. You work on it, and a lot of mechanics involved. I think all projects, right? You kind of need that date to get to get the project done. Otherwise, it never gets done. But I think it was always Nisei Week was always the big thing or the big driver to get your car project done. I think too, there's some ego involved, right? It's like, I'm going to get my car out there. This is the big showing of my vehicle and stuff like that. But I think it's we talked before in another place, but I think it's just a sense of community and belonging and doing something cool with your friends and just a really large gathering, right? Where everybody kind of had a shared identity in a way and something to relate to, and just to have a really good time at it.
So for me, Nisei Week is not a cruise I ever drove in personally with one of my cars, because in my time, that was the premier place. And you didn't, in the late 70s, you didn't take your car out unless it belonged there, because you literally would hear people laughing on the sidewalk. So while I always have had showable, notable lowered cars in my lifetime, it's not one that I would take out there. I would cruise the smaller carnivals. That's something I would always do every year. But Nisei Week was not one. And from friends of mine, so I was always the passenger, which to me was almost as fun as being the driver. But I just remember late nights in the garages, the guys putting their cars together, waxing, polishing, making sure it was ready for the next day. And there they were. It was kind of like the day. So like Brian mentioned, just kind of getting ready for the ultimate show. So in a way.
So Janet, just so I'm clear about this, you could have cruised it, but you felt like the cars that you had at the time weren't up to snuff?
Absolutely not.
Wow, you have a very high bar, I think. Yeah.
No, that as a teenager and during that time, no, that's not something I would do. And maybe later it might have been a little bit different.
Yeah.
But and actually, now that I think about it, in the 80s, yeah. Anyhow, yeah, no, but I never was the driver.
Yeah. Ken, did you ever drive it during it, or was it over by the time you got your license?
It was about the time, but I could recollect within our circle was, well, in high school, can I go back to like geographical areas? Well, I'm from Cerritos, and there was 3 or 4 different car crews, and everybody stayed competitive. But when it came to like the cruises, everybody wanted to rep their city. So I think that's, I don't know how it was in the 70s, but in the 80s, a couple guys even the teams got together, rolled out to these cruises, and you wanted to rep your city. And that's how ours was a little bit maybe different.
Yeah. Well, how would you actually rep the city? Was it like,
The crews that would rep, like there were crews from like West Covina, Gardena, and everywhere else, but you just wanted to represent your city. So there's like 4 or 5 teams, but we all came together and rolled out together.
Right. But I mean, I'm asking, like, you had car stickers or you had
yeah,
plate
definitely.
holders. That's how you repped it. Yeah. Got it.
Everyone had their own stickers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Todd, how about you? How would you get ready for the cruise?
I was kind of like Janet. I really didn't cruise much, but I actually enjoyed building other people's vehicles, doing the engines and tuning, etc. So I'd like to actually more spectate and watch these cars cruise. But also, Ken, too, mentioned about your city, right? There was, back in our time, probably late 70s, early 80s, there was the east side, the west side. So there's a lot of, I guess, reputation to uphold. So I think that was a big part of this whole cruise as well.
It's funny, too, because you wouldn't know a person by their name. So I just remember the V8 Vega or the Pinto, the V8 Pinto that was out there. What was his name? Tod Kaneko? I have no idea. So, but I remember the car.
Oh, no, it was a little 4-cylinder.
Okay. I don't think so.
Which side of town held it down the best? Is everyone going to have a different answer, I feel like?
Yeah, I think everybody has their own pride.
Right. No one's
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah, folks are not biased, I'm sure. Actually, Todd, you actually predicted my next question, which is, what was it like being on the streets watching? Because looking at Scott's video, you just see that massive humanity on the sidewalks spilling out into the streets, just spectating. So if you guys can talk you all can talk a little bit about the experience on the spectating side and what it was like to be in the midst of that.
That's a good question. I guess, again, being pretty young back then, I mean, it was just captivating, just watching cars cruise, people on bikes, just the crowd itself, and just everybody's just fixed on watching the cars. I think a lot of that, too, was the carnival. I mean, I think people attended the carnival, obviously for the games and the family stuff, but I think they're really for the cruise. They would stay after, and everybody would line the streets, and then, just watch the cars. I mean, that, I think, drew the people to the carnivals.
Anyone else, please? Janet, go for it.
So all I remember is always like a frenzy, and it almost seemed like from attending in the 70s and the 80s, it was almost the wild, wild west in the 70s to some degree, if you can imagine what I mean by that, versus in the 80s, it was, I don't know how to describe it. It just had a different vibe, but it was definitely still the same kind of excitement. And I think it almost felt like there were less, well, maybe not more, I was going to say less rules, but maybe that's not a good description. But just people were, and like Dwayne would say, my husband would say, the police were car enthusiasts. So he'd get pulled over so that they could ask him about to pop his hood and look at his engine, which I think is hilarious. But so it was a different kind of a time, if you will. Today, that would never happen. I mean, you would never see street racing the way it looks today. Back then, it was almost a camaraderie in a different kind of a way, I guess. But yeah, no, it was just fun. Everybody screaming and yelling and having fun, and it was all fun. It was never, anything really bad. It was just dangerous. And looking back, really, but because people literally would be in the streets. I mean, you could get run over at the races. You could get hit, but no one ever did. Well, except at the end, that was kind of a bad thing.
Yeah, we'll get to that story too. It's funny that you would mention that, Janet, because when I first when Brian first told me about the cruise, in my mind, I had this very kind of romantic image of something that would be like from a movie where all these cars are being very slow and orderly. And then I watched Scott's video and I'm like, holy crap, this is terrifying. I think as a teenager, I would have thought it was the coolest thing in the world. But as a middle-aged parent, I'm like, yeah, this is kind of sus. So I can relate to that experience. But in any case, Brian or Ken, again, what do you remember from just being on the sidewalk watching this all happen?
The part that was the most mind-blowing to me was obviously the main event, which is the Nisei Week. They have the carnival that's going on. That's an official event. The cruise is not an official event, but it is really an event that marks like the reason why many of us came. And the thing that was most mind-blowing, like I mentioned, was they were selling T-shirts for the Nisei cruise. It became like a Janet Jackson concert merchandise. So everyone was getting T-shirts every year or things like that. So I think it was really amazing.
By the way, is someone tapping on the mic? I can't see from here, but it's just very audible. So please don't fidget if you can help it. Thank you. Yeah.
I think when I think back about just the whole event and just that era, I think it's just kind of unique because, like Janet was saying, I think in some ways it was kind of unpoliced, right? But yet there was some order. But some of the thoughts I would always have every time, when I would attend is, how long do we got before it gets shut down, right? Or, how can we get out there and get a few runs on the street before it gets shut down or cops start pulling us over? So I think on one side, you have this cruise going on and the cars going by. But I think on the other side, you're thinking in the back of your mind, I only got so much time before I'm going to get busted. And, it's always kind of I just got to get as many runs as I can down the street before the cops come. And, I think so in that sense, there's kind of some race that you want to get to because you just want to get your car out there all the time, hope you don't, hit the signals and stuff like that. But, I think in some ways now, well, it doesn't happen at all now, but I just think there's just a lot more regulation on all levels that go on with these type of events.
And, this actually really leads to the next topic, which is, Janet, you were talking about how your husband, Dwayne, would get pulled over not to be ticketed because they wanted, the police wanted to see what was, they wanted to learn more about the car. I think at some point the car enthusiasm amongst the police shifted to, no, they actually started ticketing people instead. And this had to do with as the cruise grew, especially across the 1980s, it began to become more controversial. And we had hoped to have Joyce Wakano-Chin join us on the panel today. She is the longtime Nisei Week Festival secretary and board member, and she couldn't make it out today. But when I interviewed her, she gave me sort of the festival side of the cruise. This is the cruise side of the cruise, but this is the festival side of the cruise. And she was mentioning that they began to the festival began to field complaints about the cruise as early as the late 70s. And one major reason that coincided with this is because in Little Tokyo, between the late 70s and early 80s, there was a wave of new apartment housing that was going up in and around this neighborhood. And that includes complexes like Tokyo Gardens and the Teramachi homes. And with more people residentially living here in Little Tokyo, the late night noise of the cruise drew complaints that went to both the Nisei Week organizers as well as the LAPD. And concurrent to all of this is the LAPD had created a cruising task force in the late 70s that began to shut down cruising spots around Los Angeles one by one. So that includes Whittier Boulevard, it includes Van Nuys, and eventually that task force also became involved in enforcement in and around Little Tokyo and the cruise. So I'm wondering if you all can talk a little bit about what did you see around the pushback within the community or from the festival or from the police around the cruise that began to make it more controversial, make it more difficult for people to come out and cruise it. And Brian, I know you've talked with me about some of this history, if you don't mind sharing that.
Well, I think it kind of starts with the ticketing, right? So they're looking at your cars, you get pulled over, they pop your hood. So in some ways you may feel like it's harassment, but definitely the ticketing is one thing that increased. But I think when it got really regulated, I think it was more of the shutting down of the streets. So you couldn't even get your car close to where the event is per se. And I think that really kind of stopped a lot of it that was going on as far as the cruising.
Anyone else, your experiences in watching either law enforcement or watching, hearing complaints about the cruise, if you witnessed that in some way or another?
Only thing that comes to my mind that I remember is after the Monday after the weekend of the Nisei Week cruise, I'd hear about all the people that did get the tickets. So, usually it was a mad scatter, and people that were left and got caught, that got pulled over got tickets. So there were a lot of ticketing in that time frame, the late 70s, early 80s that I recall also. So it did happening, although I don't know, Dwayne, he probably talked himself out of that ticket. I don't know. But yeah.
My
No.
My recollection would be when it gets dark. I remember seeing a couple of motorcycle cops and a notebook, and they were writing down plates. And if they see it multiple times, that's when it happens. So I think that's how they curbed it. But rather than actually shutting it down, because if they shut it down, I don't know if they wanted to get more tickets out. I don't know, but that's how, when I saw it, that's how I recollect how they stopped it.
Are you missing? Oh, you guys have to share a mic real quick. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess a different perspective is being a family man now is just, I think the safety was a big issue. And I can understand that. I think back then we were a little crazy. So I totally respect that. So I think that was probably one of the elements why the crackdown actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's different perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to briefly mention there is a fantastic book that just came out a couple of years ago from a historian named Gary Cross called Machines of Youth. And it really tracks the rise and fall of cruising, especially here in the Los Angeles area. And Ken, to your point, one of the things that the LAPD figured out in terms of how to crack down, and this was then adopted by police departments across the country, was checking to see how many times cars came around. So once you're okay, but the third time, boom, then sirens get lit up and they would come out. And so, what happened to Nisei Week was certainly not specific to the festival or the cruise, but was really something that over the course of the 1980s, again, every major cruising spot in LA saw very similar kinds of enforcement happening because law enforcement and city officials were all sharing similar tactics in terms of how to shut this stuff down. And so the last cruise was in 1988. So the video that we saw earlier from Scott was in 87. So really, this was one of the last cruises that happened. What is it from people on the panel? What caused the cruise to end? Why wasn't there a cruise after 88? Janet, why don't you start, because you know part of the story.
So I remember, as Ken mentioned, there used to be these Obon festivals, and they would have these every summer. And the one specifically in Orange County, I remember going to that year. I was there that day where there was an event, although when I was there, I had no idea that anything had happened, but there was a tragic accident at that that carnival that day where it involved a motorcyclist with a family, and so speaking of being a parent in dangerous situations, that was kind of the doom of and the end toward it because of that accident that occurred.
Right, and I've heard about this accident from numerous people I've interviewed, including I think maybe Brian and Todd. So if you all have heard that same story.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was probably the end of it all. And like everyone else is saying, when you get older now, as a parent, you think that's probably the right thing to do. But I do think, though, when it comes to kind of going back to the Nisei Week and the Nisei Week Carnival, right? I think there's been a lot of talk about the carnival ended the cruises, right? Which I think most of us really agree that no, when the cruising stopped, the carnival ended, basically.
Because no one was coming out anymore.
No one's coming out. So yeah.
My recollection would be more towards in the later 80s. Outside of the whole car community, there was a huge gang influx in every city that's in Los Angeles. I'm sure you guys seen old movies as Colors or other things like that, where people that were not into cars but just want to be in the mix came to these, and there were a couple of gang fights in the later 80s. And that's also, and I've heard, I can't validate it, but I do recall there was a stabbing in like 88, 80, somewhere around there. And that's when I felt like I shouldn't go, even though it continued. So maybe a lot of people felt that way. So that could be another addition to it.
Yeah. Todd, anything you want to add here?
No, I think they kind of covered the bases. It was a tough time, when everything just kind of ended. The kids or adults back then too had nothing to do. So.
Yeah. Real quick, I just wanted that image that you just saw on screen. I don't know if you all can go back one, but what Nisei Week did the year after, and I learned this through the Cruise Nisei Facebook group, is that they replaced the cruise with an auto show. So they still wanted to have some element, but that was static. It's in a parking lot. It's much easier to control. So there was still an attempt at keeping, some element of car culture involved in Nisei Week. But to Brian's, the point that Brian was saying earlier, the cruise couldn't happen. They shut down streets. So literally, there's no place that you could drive the car, in addition to sort of law enforcement and harassment that happened at that same time. So Ken, I actually want to turn to you more in detail here, because you, for I think the last 20 years, have been handling and organizing and promoting the annual Nisei Week Showoff, which is a car show. So how did you get involved with putting that car show together for the festival?
Well, when we first heard about an opportunity like this, we did know that there was a couple attempts to put a car show together, but it wasn't done with a promotions group. So back in '94, we were already doing the Showoff car shows. It was a traveling tour, 13 cities, and back then, before social media, we plastered about like 70,000 flyers all within the city, letting them know that there's an event at like a fairgrounds or convention center. And we gathered about 200 to 300 cars. So when we actually did hear that the Nisei Week would be interested, we were put together by Joel, who is a very popular from Made Entertainment. And he was a very popular JA American nightclub promoter, and that wanted to do something different and wanted to bring back the youth. And come full circle in 2000, we were actually got together with Nisei Week Foundation, and we created a board, obviously the car show board, and that's how it gave birth to the Nisei Week car show.
Yeah. And by that point, I'm kind of curious, especially as someone who had been introduced to this scene in the 80s, what had you see change by the time you started doing the Nisei Week show-offs by the 2000s? How had the cars changed, the community of enthusiasts changed? What were some of the things that you saw?
The first biggest part would be demographics. So back when we first started 94 or at Pomona Fairplex, you would see names such as like, Kaneda or Lee or Kim. But when we started doing things closer to 2000s, you would see, different ethnicities come in. And this was actually a perfect opportunity or perfect timing to introduce this whole culture to other people within the, within the festival. So that's pretty much how it started.
Yeah. And so if people had seen the 4 cars on the plaza, if you remember Sesame Street, sort of one thing is not like the other, which is the deco car that, again, Samuel drove down from Reno to be out there alongside all of these vintage cars from the 1970s. Can you talk a little, because you've been, I think, really, Ken, at the forefront of promoting deco cars. Can you describe exactly what a deco car is and where the movement or craze has come from?
Deco car is a short term for decoration car. And I know that most people, when you think about cars that are stickered out, they're mostly more anime. But there are different aspects of livery, like racing designs and everything else. So we wanted to explore and bring in a new culture of anime. And also, there were also people that were into anime that were very into cars. And this actually started about 12, 15 years ago in Japan. It was called Itasha. And just as I noticed back in earlier 2000 about drifting, and obviously we brought it here, I wanted to bring the whole new influence of and new trends here to the United States.
Yeah, and you want to just quickly plug your Instagram account? Because the cars there are amazing in terms
Oh, I could do the shameless plug?
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, it's on Instagram. It's at DecoCar. It's at Mark, DEKOCAR, and also in Facebook. So you can find us. We have a Facebook group as well. And also we have quite a following on Instagram, and we post every day. So if you check it out, we would appreciate it.
Right. And since I extended that to Ken, if any of you want to plug your social media or anything else that you would like to promote, I'll give you the opportunity right now. I mean, Brian, you want to talk about the Cruise Nisei group on Facebook?
Yeah, it's actually a private group.
Well, people can still ask. I mean, you can decide whether to let them in or not. But yeah.
All it is a circle of us car friends. We created this private group, really to just talk about cars. And it's not necessarily old stuff. There's a lot of new stuff too. But I have to say, it's really a group of friends, right? And probably some of the dialogue that goes on in there needs to stay in there. So, we'll leave it at that. It's a private group.
But the fact that it's called Cruise Nisei is obviously a direct reference back to the Nisei Week Cruise.
Oh, absolutely. I think it was actually a couple of us. One gentleman, Koichi Kanda, and I were talking, and we talked about trying to create a small private group so we can all talk openly, and with the keyword being openly. But we still felt the need to keep it private. But we thought, everybody in this group is kind of car oriented, right? And to kind of give it a certain identity, we named it that Cruise Nisei because that was what we used to say back in the days of cruising, right? It's like, are you going to cruise Nisei this year, or and that's where we got that name, and we just decided to name the group that because we really couldn't think of anything else.
Right. I mean, you all made, I think you might have seen in some of the photos or videos, you all made stickers that say Cruise Nisei. You all made license plate holders, which for it too. Actually, I want to get one of those from you. So, I mean, this is more than just like a group of friends reminiscing. I mean, it's also something that you're you feel pride in, and that you're making merch for it, which is kind of, that's an extra step, if you will.
Yeah, that's private merch.
Yes.
Actually.
Yes.
But,
What happens in the group stays in the group. It's
yes,
like Vegas
yes.
that way.
But,
Got it.
No, it was kind of that thing of, I think in some ways we thought it's a way to kind of bring back that group and
Right.
camaraderie,
Right.
right? And only a certain crowd of people, I think, kind of understand the name right off the bat.
Right.
So that's where it kind of all comes from, and that's why we keep it that way.
Got it. Janet or Todd, anything you want to plug?
Cruise Nisei. It's kind of nice because it keeps us old folks in touch with with each other as well, and it's harder too. Again, back to the family thing, right? Everybody's distracted, and it's a good link to keep us all in touch, and it's not HR compliant either, right? So it's quite fun. That's for you, Janet.
Yes. Right. Yeah, my bad. I violated the rule. My bad. Janet, anything you want to mention?
Probably the only thing that comes to mind is, so as a teenager and a young adult, I was very much into this, had a family, everything went dark on pause, wasn't important. And at some point, my son, who I think is watching, brought it back to my house. So when he's that era of Tokyo Drift. So Jonathan, you did this. So so it came back to my house, and somehow my daughter got into this, and we just had a lot of fun with it. And Ken, when he brought back the shows, it was really fun because now I'm out there again, and there's thousands of people that could be in this seat today. And I kept thinking, Oliver, why do you want me up here? It's just so, because I'm not that person.
Because you're awesome.
So, but I was in it in the beginning, and I've continued to do it today. So I'm actually in a car club team called Our Rides, that I'm very proud and happy to be a part of, and we compete and show regularly now. And one of the shows that I always like to attend every year is Ken's. So it's been unfortunate the last 2 years we haven't been able to go out to show off.
By the way, I'd like to plug the Our Ride Suites, the shows. Top-notch cars.
But anyhow, so that's why I feel honored to be here and just as a part of this. And it's somehow just become a part of myself and my family. And Dwayne, as I keep mentioning, is a big part of that as well. He's the one putting together all the cars. So.
I wonder if each of you could, we're going to try to bring things to a close in the next few minutes so we can open things up for audience questions. When you think back about the cruise, right, about the Nisei Week cruise, what do you think for you individually, what was the importance of it for the larger Japanese American community here in Los Angeles? And why don't we just start with Brian?
You didn't give me any time to think about that one. I think the cruise, again, at least for me, or what my perception was, is definitely as a car person, it was to bring your car and to see a bunch of other cars, right? I think not just yourself showing off your own stuff, but seeing other people's works, right? And seeing some pretty amazing works as well. So I think that was a big thing back then. So, just a certain sense of community and camaraderie amongst people that have common interests of you. I think there's this other thing too, of, as when you're growing up, or, as a teen or young adult, you're still trying to feel out your identity and trying to figure out, who am I and where do I fit in? And I think a lot of this, to me, it's all in the mix, right? A lot of that's in the mix. So I think a lot of these folks are out there. They're doing stuff with the cars. They're at the carnivals. They're socializing. But I think each in themselves are even looking at, gosh, I'm still trying to figure it out, right? Who am I? What am I doing? These are all my friends are doing this. I'll do this too. And to me, it's just a part of growing up, right? And just just that phase of your life.
Janet.
So what came to my mind when you asked that question is growing up in the time that I did, it wasn't cool and popular to be Asian or Japanese. And I remember feeling discrimination on a lot of levels when I was younger around my family. You'd go to places and you just could tell. And we're in Southern California, so maybe it's not as blatant, but it was definitely there. And I kind of feel like that was almost a sense of belonging. You could feel comfortable, you could be yourself. It didn't really matter. And everybody was like you, kind of. And you didn't have to pretend like you were trying to be something else. I remember when I was younger thinking, I want to be very Americanized, but we take off our shoes in the house. And people would say to me, well, why do you take off your shoes when they would come over? So things like that, I don't understand you guys, so it just felt like a sense of belonging somehow. So.
Ken.
What comes to mind? I'll put it more in the culture and business aspect of it. Culturally, I'm sure you could relate, Oliver, like when you think hip hop, it came from New York. Right? So when you think about the automotive import culture, it actually came from Los Angeles. And who made that hip hop movement would be the Puerto Ricans and African Americans, right? And I would think that the heartbeat of everything that started came with the Japanese Americans here. And it's not noted, nor is it put in history books or anything like that, but I'm glad that you put together something to bring it forward. So on our end, as a panelist, I really commend you for doing this.
Well, thank you. Tod.
Yeah, I think I kind of echo everybody's viewpoint here on the panel. I think for me, a car is just a conduit, right? So it kind of helped bridge our passions, our interests, the community as well, the Nikkei community. So I think that leveraging that, the vehicle itself, it just helped bridge everything together and just help pull us together.
Thank you for that. So we do have some time now for any questions from the audience, both those here in person at the forum, as well as those who are watching live. I think I just heard that we have 56 people watching, so that's awesome. If there's anyone out there in the internet land wants to ask a question, you can do it in the Zoom link, or I think there's, if we can flash on the phone number, they can text their questions too. We actually received a question for the panel 2 weeks ago when this event was announced from BG, and they wanted to know, quote, how did the amber side markers and lit up rear ambers come about? Totally Asian. Me and my cousins did that on our cars as well. And just for context, BG, I believe, is Chinese American. So he was just curious, like, how did the amber lights become an Asian thing, basically? I have no idea what he's talking about. I'm assuming someone here does, because I hear people laughing. So anyone want to explain the ambers? Actually, what are they, first of all, and how did that come about, if anyone knows?
So amber lights obviously are amber, the color itself is for the turn signal, right? So it only goes on when you blink. So when you actually rewire and put it on a switch, you could make it go constant. So when you're actually driving, whether it be on the freeway or on the street, you would know who's a modified car because the ambers are on full. So that's when you actually, when you're on the freeway or wherever you can hit them up and see, if you want to race or give respect to each other. So that's how I noticed that, there are modded cars. But there's some people that could figure it out. And I had my friends actually wire it because I didn't know how to wire it, but it became a fad, I think. So that's how you know.
Is that street legal?
Oh, no, it's not.
Okay.
No, it's not.
Okay.
But that's what's cool about it, because it's not street
Got
legal.
it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of. I think in some ways it's different, right? So you see all these red tail lights everywhere, and to have amber tail lights, you're different. And the same thing with the side markers, right? You have an amber front side marker, red side marker in the back, and that was like, I think, some of the first things you do, right? You switch out the rear side marker to an amber one, but I do think that to Ken's point, I think there's a certain part of when you see that amber tail light or amber side marker, that driver is doing something with his car or wanting to. Yeah, it's like, okay, you either want to let's go pull outside and try and race, or you know, but there's a linkage there, right? And I think that's all part of it.
So if you wonder what they're talking about when you go out to the plaza and you look at Todd Z, go to the back of the car and you'll see exactly what they're talking about. Those are ambers. They're beautiful.
Sharon, we should get this hooked up on our Prius. You know, maybe Ken or one of his friends can help us do it, you know. All right. Questions from the audience here. Yes. And if you don't mind just quickly introducing yourself and then ask your question. So the question is from John, and he wants to know, how did the JA community play a role in the popularization of Japanese import cars across the 70s or 60s, 70s, and 80s? And Todd, I know you definitely have some thoughts on this, so we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think it's back in the late 70s. The big V8s were common, the domestic vehicles. We got a lot of respect because we built small four-cylinder engines, turbocharged or supercharged, and we would actually outperform some of these larger V8 vehicles. And so I think that alone, you know, just we got a lot of respect for these small Japanese cars. So I think that was, to me, a starting point.
Anyone else have these thoughts about, again, what role did this community here play in legitimizing, popularizing, however you want to characterize it, sort of cars coming from Japan? Because you know, people who know about the automotive history of Japanese car brands trying to break into the American market, it was not that well received in the initial attempts in the 1950s, and it really took another few decades and the oil crisis of the 70s to kind of fuel that. But it also has a lot to do with people driving them, seeing them out there, and helping to familiarize, I think, the rest of the country to the potential of these cars.
Well, I mean, for me, yeah, I have a really big appreciation for muscle cars, right, from the 60s and 70s. But for me, honestly, as someone who's vertically challenged, right, you know, it's hard for me to steer over the steering wheels of a lot of these cars. So, you know, my buying choices are pretty limited, so I buy smaller cars.
Okay. Janet?
So I was just thinking, you know, as I mentioned, it was laughable to drive some of these cars in the mid 70s at Nisei Week because the muscle cars did dominate, and they really were not accepted. It took a long time, and if you remember the Toyotas and the Datsuns of the 60s, they weren't received well right out of the box. And I think one big turning point was the 240Z being announced in the US, because that was a car that everybody loved. No matter who you were, you just loved that car. The lines on it are just iconic. And I think that brought a lot of credibility when Datsun brought that car out. And then the second thing that came to mind, to Todd's point, is there were cars out there that were very fast, and the muscle cars just couldn't believe it. It's like, how could this little four-banger do these things? So that brought up a lot of credibility, I think.
I mean, Ken, you're of, I think, my generation. So I came of age as a teenager in the mid-late 80s, and this was at the forefront of the import car movement. The way I remember it is it's the tricked-out Hondas, it's the Integras, right, the Supras. And so how did you see whether it's the JA or maybe the larger Asian American community, how do they play a role in legitimizing that wave of cars?
I think the best way that I could recollect is, you know, in the mid 80s when I was actually, you know, riding, I wasn't driving yet. There are spots that are welcome for, they call it rice rockets, right? So back at, now it's Del Taco, but it was Noggles. Where was it? You're right, Noggles. When you actually go there, there were a good amount of domestics still there when we were there, and we still felt like we are intruding their space, and we respected it. But we had because we weren't messing with cars in the 70s and 60s, we didn't know about basically modifications with that. But come 84, 85, I think when the Hondas started coming out with their sport, you know, the SIs and the S's, and there were companies from Japan that actually made parts That's, I think, when the turning point of actually high school kids that just got their license would want to either get a Honda or some sport compact car and mod it. And I think it's a change of taste, I think, just like how now people are into electric cars and, they're the fans of electric cars. I think that's the turning point of change of taste. And I would like to add, there was some magazines to cover these things, and it shot over to all these other states that saw this and wanted to mod their cars that way.
Yeah. John, great question. Thank you so much for that. Anyone else have a question out there? So Dee's question is about the fact that there are now new versions of older vintage models that are coming out, kind of almost like a reproduction of a sort, or the sequels in a sense. And so the question here is, what does it feel like for folks here to see the cars that they kind of grew up with and valued getting a second life from some of these makers? And I'll throw it to whoever wants to answer this.
Can I ask you first, Dee, what are you building?
So the answer that for the live stream is Dee is working on an STI Impreza Hachi C-Class, which I might have gotten the order there wrong. I'm not a car guy, but I hope I got communicated that. But go ahead.
I enjoy seeing some of the cars kind of come back. It seems like the manufacturers kind of do that, where they'll have a run on a car, then they'll discontinue it, and then a few years later they come back again, right? We've seen that with like the recent Supra, or Honda / Acura just announced the Integra coming back, things like that. I think it's cool personally. My preference is that the car still retains some of the history lines on, and again, I don't think any of us have really seen what the Integra will look like yet, but at least what you kind of see, out on the web and stuff, to me, it's like, yeah, it looks kind of cool. I mean, it's to the point where, actually, I think I would actually buy something like that. I think overall it's great. I think it's just a normal part of just the life cycle of automobiles. And hopefully, the manufacturers will continue to kind of look upon the history and see those key points about what made that car iconic. They'll put a much more modern, flair on it, but still there's certain keynotes or points that still retain, where you look at it and say, oh, yes, that does look like an Integra, or yes, that does look like a Camaro or a Mustang.
This is a reference that only people, I think, who grew up on the West Coast in the 1980s will get. But for me, the Integra was the car equivalent of how Bizarre Love Triangle became the Asian American anthem for reasons that are still rather enigmatic. But when I think of that era, the Integra is the first car that comes to mind. And at one point, we were gifted, basically, my sister-in-law's Integra coupe. So I got to live the Integra dream, albeit like 20 years after its initial heyday. So shout out to Diane Mizoda if she's watching out there. Anyways, anyone else have some thoughts about sort of the return of some of these classic models?
Well, with all the new cars that are coming out, I think they're paying homage to the original car first. And it's great to see that maybe down the line that, I myself as a parent, that my kids would get into these platforms. So it's kind of like an opportunity, because obviously, getting into, buying a 94 Integra and remodding it would be a little bit more difficult than buying the newer version. So it's kind of like a new second win and a new way for the new generations to enjoy these cars.
Todd, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking same line as Ken. I think a lot of us maybe want to relive our past as well. So now we can kind of afford some of these new cars instead of trying to find a car and fixing it up. So again, I think it provides a good opportunity to the younger enthusiasts or the older enthusiasts as well. So there's kind of a dual opportunity.
Yeah. I just saw a hand over here. So the question from Sharon, who's my better half, is what did your parents think of your interest in cars? I'm assuming as young people, right? Yeah, actually, that's a great question. Were they down with it? Were they kind of questioning it? And again, anyone in the panel can start with this.
I don't think my mother really cared. But my father, he definitely was not down with it. It wasn't about the image that the car portrayed or that I was going out and doing these things. I think it was more about, you're just wasting your money on stuff. Why do you do stuff? Because you're just wasting money when you go do something else. But I think as time went on, and one thing that my mother actually made a comment to later on after my father passed away was, when your dad would watch you guys in the garage working on these cars, he actually started to appreciate that you would actually go through books and read them and then work on your cars and, take instructions from books and stuff. So I think, there was a full circle that kind of went there. I think as we got older, there was a little bit more respect about that. But yeah, definitely in the beginning, it was not a good conversation going on in the house at that time.
Mm-hmm. Janet?
So the only thing that comes to mind immediately when Sharon asked that was I remember coming home one day and my car had been lowered by some of my friends and my dad just about hit the roof and you need to fix that and put it back. Well, sorry, it's too late. And in those days you'd cut the spring. So, the springs are cut, can't put it back. But yeah, he was not very happy about that. Yeah. And I don't think he really understood what was happening either because he didn't really realize what was happening out there at the cruises, at the Nisei weeks and things like that either to realize that it was really that intense. So not happy.
Yeah. Todd?
Yeah, I think my family was a little bit different. My dad was a car guy as well, and my grandfather as well. He had a car club back in the 1900s, actually.
That's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So it's kind of inbred in my DNA, I guess. So my dad, they fully supported it and thought it kept us out of trouble at times, but little did they know sometimes.
Todd, are any of your kids into cars? Is it fourth generation now?
Yes, it's fourth generation. So I have a daughter and getting her interested in it. So I'm, having her help me and she's learning. She knows all the tools and if I need a tool, she'll go out there and get it for me. She can change tires, etc. So she's slowly learning. And I think it's kind of rare now for kids to actually work on cars. I think that's kind of a lost art now. I think a lot of people just send their cars out to repair shops and they don't do their own tuning. So it's almost a lost art.
Yeah, my kid doesn't even want to get a license yet, and she's 16. So yeah, it's an interesting generational shift. Ken, how about you?
The two things that I could recollect are back then, obviously you had an exhaust, right? So, and as I was either going to, can I say illegal drag races and nightclubs, because obviously I threw these events, my parents always knew when I'm getting home because at 3 o'clock you would hear that exhaust coming in. So that's one thing that that at least they know that I came home at 3. The others would be, they really didn't say much. They're first generation Japanese, so they're kind of very, very quiet. But when I was in my 30s, my mom actually told me I was always wondering what you did, so I actually followed you. She told me this when I was in my 30s. So that's, I was a little shocked, but I was actually happy that she was concerned. So that's.
And where did you go?
Huh?
And where did she go?
That was just right when I graduated high school. So do you know Railroad? It's in Diamond Bar. It's a railroad, it's a long track right next to Railroad. So it's called Railroad Street in Roland or Hacienda, and that's where I went. And she followed me all the way from Cerritos to Roland. And I don't know how long she stuck there, but yeah, she was there, I guess.
It's like the runaway bunny. All right. So we actually had some questions coming in from our live stream audience, and one is from Travis, who asks, some of you are winning shows. Do your cars live protected in a garage now, or do they still get driven? Janet, let's start with you because you have an award-winning car out there. So how do you protect it if you do, and do you drive it regularly?
Did you see me?
Yeah.
So the Crown is in the garage right now. Garage space is always a dilemma because there's always too many cars that need to go in the garage, so we always have to figure that out. But we do drive it. We don't trailer it. We don't drive it all the time, but we do take it out. We have fun with it. So it'll go anywhere. So something about age really puts you in the frame of air conditioning and comfort. So to Dee's question, were some of the things that came to mind is with the modernization, I really like the oldness and the roughness of the old cars, but then you've got the modernized version of it, which is kind of like that Crown, which is an old 1970 car, but it's been modernized in a lot of ways. And yeah, it goes in the garage.
How about Todd and Brian?
Yeah, again, kind of priorities have changed a little bit here. So whenever I get a chance, it's typically just weekends when I get to drive the car. So when they're running, actually, sometimes they don't like to run. But yeah, again, it's just primarily a weekend thing for me.
Yeah. Brian?
Yeah, the majority of the time the car's stored, per se. I do bring it out for a couple of the shows that go on in Long Beach. And then more recently, doing a little bit more of the car meet stuff early in the mornings. But like Janet was saying, though, the car's kind of old, and yeah, it's fun to drive, but there's no power steering, there's no air conditioning, it rides rough, it's noisy, it smells, right? So,
but that's the beauty of it.
It
Brian.
used to be,
Showing your age.
For a little while, it's cool. It's like, you get that, the rich gas smell. It's like, it's cool. But after a while, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't breathe. I'm getting dizzy. So, it doesn't get out as probably much as it should, but it does get stored and it does get driven to smaller events.
Right.
So Brian is this mild-mannered guy that you see, and he gets behind that wheel, and I'm not kidding you, he's a madman. He's just, if you saw his Spectrum trailer preview with Oliver yesterday, you will see what I have meant.
For me, because I'm doing car shows and events and stuff like that, I really don't get the experience to really mod out a car like how the other panelists are doing. But I actually do buy cars and enjoy them. Like a good example is I just, this year I bought a Civic Si, and I did a K-swap, which is a newer motor. And then I've been doing autocross with it. So I just went one 2 weeks ago at Fontana. So my new love recently has been autocrossing.
Awesome. This was a anonymous question from the live stream audience, and I think maybe the anonymity makes some sense here, because the question here is, how can I pass smog for my AE86 when I move back home to Southern California because my car is no bueno with emissions, LOL?
PM me.
It's called smog plug. So, just like how there's a plug for everything, there's ways to do it. So if you know the right people, and if you ask on Facebook, there are people that do it. If you ask a question.
Are we about to get into trouble with the DMV, like answering this question?
The
here?
right answer is you put your original engine back and then you smog it.
Okay.
Ken.
Thank you. There we go. That's the official answer. All right. We have a question from Regina, which was asking about the 25-year rule for importing certain Japanese cars, and I have no idea what that means, but I'm hoping someone on the panel does. What's the 25-year rule?
Well, I think the 25-year rule is that once the car hits 25 years, it's easier to import, per se, from Japan to the U.S. And, there's certain smog thing, not in California, but for the U.S., there used to be requirements by the Department of Transportation about safety and having, metal bars in the doors and whatnot. But I believe the 25-year rule deals with when the car gets that old, you don't have to necessarily worry about a lot of that stuff. You have to worry about other things, especially here in California. But I think that the gist of the 25-year rule is that it's easier to import a Japanese car from Japan to the U.S. if it's 25 years or older.
I don't think it's ever easy because you can't register it easily. So even with those things, there's a lot of difficulty with that, even with 25 years.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed in California, especially, right? It's extremely hard.
There are states that are friendly for that. Would be like Washington, Arizona, and I could go on a couple of states, just like how some states have tax havens.
You have car import savings or something along those lines.
Yeah, so PM Ken, if you need any of that info.
We have a couple questions for specific people on the panel. And why don't we start? Actually, this is a question for Ken, and this is a question from Benson. Are there plans for another Nisei Showoff car show?
Well, we were actually planning to have one, but because of the Delta, everything went virtual. So yes, we do have plans to, and just as long as Nisei would like to have us host it, we would love to do these events.
So 2022, hopefully, we'll be able to bring it back. Awesome. Yes. And there's a question from Tim, and this is for Brian. Wants to know about your most memorable cruise. I remember Shoreline and KMA joining forces for Cherry Blossom, but if he has a memory of a very specific cruise, he would love to hear it.
I don't know if I have a specific memory between, with KMA and Shoreline doing Cherry Blossom per se. I think there's some KMA guys out here in the crowd here, but
and KMA was another racing crew,
another car crew. Since Tim asked the question, Tim always haggles me about everything. So, I would have to say it would. My memories aren't really localized to the clubs per se, right? I think it's just being able to go to these events, drive the cars and cruise, dodge police, and just engage in those type of activities overall, right? I don't think it was necessarily that doing them together with another club. It was just being out there in general was always fun.
And Janet, there's a question for you. Which pedals are on your crown?
Tim, stop it. That's Tim. That's the same Tim who was in the Toyota Museum Celica with Jay Leno and managed to get pulled over by the police. So there you go, Tim. That's a Tim story. Tim haggles me too.
But are you going to answer his question?
Oh,
okay.
I'm not.
Secrets.
You'll have to go figure it out yourself.
The secrets stay. All right. I'll take one more from the audience if there's one more question out there from our in-person audience here. John, you had, I'm sorry. I'm going to go with someone new, no offense. Yeah, go for it. Ken. So Ken wants to know two questions here. First of all, that he's noticed that there has been an increase on the secondary market for the value of cars from the late 70s and early 80s, and wants to know from the panel, what do you think about seeing this? Does it feel validating as people who were enthusiasts of that particular era to see these now gaining value on that market? So we'll start with that question.
Yeah, I could start on that answer. I think on one side it's kind of cool because I think you're starting to see an appreciation for these cars, and of course, that the value goes up. On the flip side of that, I would look at it as like, wow, it's getting more and more expensive to acquire these cars for future projects for me. But to me though, I think it's all good. Being able to see people appreciate these cars and willing to pay good money for them. And we'll see where it all goes.
Thoughts from anyone else here?
Definitely a rise in a big way in cars you never would have dreamed that would be selling for what they're selling for today. Finished cars or project cars, they're astronomical in price. It's pretty amazing. So I'm not sure if that's good or bad to Brian's point for those reasons, but yeah, definitely a rise.
How about you, Todd?
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement. The value, especially in parts, now even used parts are just sky high. It's just ridiculous. So that's the tough point, but it's nice to see the value of the vehicles going up. it's kind of interesting. I think a lot of these, even other European cars. I was up at the Monterey Car Week last week, and some of these Porsches and stuff, you can't even touch them now. They're so expensive. So I think in general, just the car culture worldwide is kind of expanding, and prices are elevating. So it's good and bad.
Yeah. Ken, anything you want to add on this one?
I know you asked a question about if what car do you regret selling or letting go?
Yeah. So sorry.
So
yeah,
I could add to that.
So the question from Ken in the audience was, is there a car that you used to have that you wish you had held on to? So go ahead, Ken, on the panel.
Okay, so I could answer that. It's actually my second car. I had an 87 CRX SI. It was yellow with a real like Mugen. It's really hard to find these body kits. It's a 9-piece body kit with racing hearts. So that's something that if I would have kept, I definitely would be happy. So if I could recollect back, I wish I had that car still. But it's great that you guys still kept your cars. I'm jealous.
Tod, how about you? What's the one that got away or you let get away?
Actually, my first car was a Capri and a Pinto, so I have no regrets, actually. Yeah, so, and luckily I still have my 2 Datsuns that I've had for 30 or 40 years now, so I'm kind of lucky right now.
Yeah. Janet?
I've been through a lot of cars in my lifetime, but a lot. But, you know, actually looking back, I don't think I really regret any of the sales, except not so much selling them. And it's kind of a funny thing, and you guys, if you can relate to this, you'll know what I mean, is the buyer is very important to me. So whoever buys your car, I'm almost screening them as much as they're looking at the car. And so that's usually why it's not too painful to let them go. And my feeling is you can always get another one and I'll bring it home and Dwayne's going to have another project to build. So yeah, sorry, honey. But yeah, so I don't think I have any regrets really.
Brian?
Yeah, you know, I don't know. Actually, some of the cars I've had before, I still have. But, my first car was they call it a long nose, but it was a long nose Celica coupe, which I don't have anymore. I don't know if I necessarily want to get that back. I wouldn't mind having another long nose again, but the liftback Celica that I have now is considered a long nose, so I feel like I kind of got that one back already. But if one comes around for the right price, of course, you'll scoop it up. But I don't know if I really necessarily have a car that I had before that I don't now that I really want to get back again.
I can identify with Tod. My first car was a 1980 Chevrolet Citation, and I definitely am not nostalgic for that at all. That said, my father-in-law, I think when he got his first real paycheck, went out and bought a Corvette Stingray, and God, I wish he had kept that. You should have told your dad he should have kept that one. He probably feels like he should have kept that one too, I bet, actually. All right, I'm going to take the moderator's privilege here and ask the last question, and then we're going to wrap up. We know what your project cars are. What's your daily drive, Brian?
My daily driver is a 2006 Lexus GS.
Janet?
2017 Toyota Mirai, which is a hydrogen car.
Ken?
Family man car, Toyota Venza. Yeah.
And Tod?
Yeah, I have to be correct on this one. I work for Mazda, so I do drive a Mazda CX-5. It's the new turbo edition, so it's actually a really good car.
Yeah, great. Well, I want to thank, first of all, let's please thank the panelists here. Thank you all for coming out in person. Thank you all on the live stream for tuning in, and I'm going to turn things back to Joy.
And can we have another round of applause for our panelists and for Oliver moderating this wonderful panel? Thank you again, as he mentioned, to everyone who's here in person, and thank you to our virtual audience. It's been really great. I've learned so much. I'm excited to drive out of here with a little more, pizzazz. But I also hope that you all go outside and check out the cars that are on the plaza, as we mentioned, with kind of a new perspective. Also, please join us in our galleries. Our museum is open until 5, last admission at 4:30. You can head across the plaza to check out our new exhibit, A Life in Pieces, and check out our core exhibition, Common Ground, and we'd love to see you there as well. And thank you so much to also our partners, Yum Yum F and Philip. I don't know where you are in the audience, but thank you for all your partnership on this as well. And with that, thank you so much. We hope to see you next time. Please check out our other upcoming programs at janm.org. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much, everyone.
I forgot to add, so as Anne, the CEO of the museum, mentioned, the museum is exploring the possibility of doing a larger exhibit about Japanese American car culture in Southern California in the future. And we want to use this opportunity to invite anyone in the audience, whether here in person or online, if you have photos, videos, car plaques, stickers, posters, whatever that would be something that might be useful for that exhibit. We would love to have the community play a role in this. This exhibit would only be possible with the participation of the community. So if you have something that you think might be, again, useful for the exhibit, you can contact collections at JANM, so Japanese American National Museum.org. So collections at janm.org. And there will be a lot of outreach that's going to start to happen, especially with our panelists, and I'm sure some of the people in the audience here, over the next couple of years as this exhibit hopefully can take shape. So as we said at the beginning, this is kind of the first, kind of the appetizer, but there's a main course around this topic yet to come. So thank you.